Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. I'm so glad that you're here, and I'm so sorry that it took me so long to put up another video, but better late than never. Today we're going to be talking about 3 witches. They were 2 daughters and a mother. Okay, I was keeping it all in the fam today. And what happens with them is off the wall. Now, during this time, this is when King James is around, who's written the demonology book, and then we have all of these demon hunters and things like that, witch hunters. So people were really in the mindset of witches being in their area, witches being around them, witches casting spells for the weather or to kill their livestock or to kill their kids, or it's all witches' fault. The healers, the shamans, the midwives, those are all now witches. Okay, they're not healers anymore, but we all know this. So anyway, today, like I say, we're going to be talking about 3 women, and they are the Witches of Belvoir. Okay, or you can call them the Bottesford witches too, because this happens in England. 3 women and a mother and her 2 daughters were accused of witchcraft in East England in 1619, and what leads up to their execution is absolutely bizarre, and I'm going to tell you guys all about it. So before I do that, let me just say my name is Brandy. If you're new here, I bring you guys dark history that has to do with witches, witchcraft, sorcery, magic, werewolves, you name it, I'm going to go over it. And so while I do that, I put makeup on my face, and if you want to know what I use, I'll list it down below in the description along with the link where you can get it at. And if that sounds awesome to you, please subscribe to the channel, as I would much appreciate it, because I am a new creator. But anyway, let's go on ahead and get this party started. Now, Joan Flower was the name of the mother, and the daughters were Margaret and Philippa Flowers. Okay, so this is all about the Flower family today. And so Joan, the mom, was kind of mean, malicious. She's very grumpy and kind of like unkempt, and as we know, that's kind of like a check mark in the book of being a witch. If you don't keep up with appearances and look nice all the time and be sweet all the time, plus there were no men living in the home, which means either she had been married, obviously she had been married, but her husband had passed and she never remarried. And so back then, men thought that women who were not in the company of men were more susceptible to being taken over by the devil. Straight up, 100%, they thought that a woman had to be with a man, and that man would prevent the devil from taking over her and all this other kind of stuff. Now, the Flowers family were herbal healers. They were. Especially the daughters, more the daughters than the mom, but they were herbal healers, and they liked to help heal the sick and things like that with herbs, which is something that people used to do back in the day. And so this kind of put a little bit of what their mother being so raw and them not having husbands and things like that. So the sisters took their time and they focused on herbs. But unfortunately, this kind of kept them basically poor, because they were always asking for a handout, and I know we've heard this before, but they were always asking people, and they were trying to help people and all this stuff. Well, there is a castle in this place, and this castle holds the Earl of Rutland. Okay, and every year, or certain times a year, King James would come to this castle to visit, because it was like exquisitely beautiful. I'll put a picture up, and he would come and visit. And so when he would come and visit the Earl and the Countess, they would have to hire more servants, obviously, than they had, because they had somebody big coming to town. Okay, and so they had to hire more people. So who did they end up hiring? They hired the Flower family, Joan, Margaret, and Philippa. So they started working for Francis Manners, who was the Earl at the time, and his wife. Well, you'd think they'd be like, yay, you know, I got a job, I'm making money and stuff like that. Well, unfortunately, they kind of clashed with the other servants in the house. And supposedly, they were caught stealing things as well from the castle. Okay. And so it's not too long that, you know, the Earl lets them go and says, you know, you got to go. You can't stay here. You're stealing from us. You're doing all these crazy things. You know, we hired you just because James, you know, King James I is coming in. I think it's the first. And, you know, we don't need this madness. So I'm just going to go ahead and dismiss you guys. And I'm going to give you only 40 shillings, a pillow, and a mattress. And off they went. They were fired. Okay? Point blank period. Nobody liked them in the house. They weren't getting along with anybody. They supposedly stole stuff. And so they were fired. Point blank period. Now, after they get fired, what happens? Okay. So the Earl has 3 kids. His 2 sons and a daughter. Okay. Now, the Earl and his wife end up getting very sick after the 2 are dismissed. No, excuse me. The 3, the Flower girls are dismissed. And it reaches both of their sons. And it's like convulsions and throwing up and all this crazy stuff. And he gets worse and worse and worse. And one of the sons dies. Okay. And then it's not too long after that the other son, who's also named Francis, dies as well, very shortly after his brother. Now, these 2 kids were heirs to the castle, to, you know, their dad. They were going to take over for their dad when their dad passed away, the Earl. And one of them would be, you know, they would take over the earldom, or the, you know, whatever it's called. Well, now both the boys have passed away under mysterious circumstances. Nobody knows what happened. Okay. And even their daughter Catherine got sick. Okay. But she lived. She didn't get as sick as her brothers, and she ended up living. But the mother and the father, the Earl and the Countess, could not have any more children. And this is going to come back up later. So their kids, Henry and Francis, end up passing away, okay, from some unknown illness, some unknown sickness that nobody knows. Catherine, it gets over her, but of course the 2, the Earl and the Countess, try to have more children because they need this male heir. They don't have a male heir to the throne anymore for the earldom or whatnot. And so they're mad. And it's 5 years after the Flower family gets fired that they decide that it was their fault. Okay. That it took them 5 years after these 2 kids have passed, their other kid was sick, the whole family was sick. It took them 5 years to say that the Flower girls did it. Okay. And we're going to circle back around to this because there's a theory, and the theory makes so much more sense than what I'm fixing to tell you. But they're thinking that they're pissed that they got fired, and so they decided to set a spell on the kids. So, to kind of cruise back a little bit, I know this is a case that I went over in the past of the 9 witches that were put to death because they supposedly were bewitching children. Okay, and I'll post the link. Okay, but because of this and the fact that there were a lot of familiars in that case, this made suspicion stir up, and this is why they pointed at the Flower sisters. Why? Because 1, their mom was angry, unkempt. They were poor. They were herbal healers. They were basically like cunning women. They like to heal people is what they were trying to do. But people were realizing that those that can heal can also harm. No duh. But it's all about in who you know. But that's neither here nor there. So they have this trial of the 9 witches, you know, and they end up all getting put to death. And so this fuels the fire for the Flower sisters in particular. Because now people have it in their minds these familiars that these witches have, they can just send them out to do their bidding, to do their will, to do whatever they want them to do. And so this made everybody suspicious of the Flower Girls. 5 years after their dismissal and the kids' deaths, they decide that they're going to take the Flower Girls and put them in jail. The Rutlands, you know, the Earl and them, they want them in jail because they think that somehow Joan whispered something, you know, evidently when she got fired, she probably said a few choice words, you know, and they took that as a curse. Okay, and so they're saying that that's what happened, that she cursed them, and you know, and so they had them arrested at Christmas of 1618. Okay, so then in February of 1619, they examined the women. Yeah, here we go, the worst thing ever. They get examined, yes they do, by a group of men. Now, I'm not sure what this examining actually was. I don't know if they were torturing the women or if they were actually looking at their bodies, you know, for witches' marks, you know, where their familiars would drink from their bodies and things like that. They had literally clergymen, a bunch of sirs in there, the Earl, a guy, and had them. I was looking at all these women, and I'm imagining torturing them, asking them questions, looking at their naked bodies, and being incredibly embarrassed by this, and being asked all these questions about somebody they worked for 5 years ago. Okay, it's bonkers, I know. And so what happens? What happens under torture is just, it's not a good thing, but we're gonna get there. So Joan, the mom, she's adamant. She's like, I'm not a witch. Point blank, period. I'm not a witch. No, no, no. And so on their way to jail, their mom, Joan, asked to take the sacrament, you know, to take in bread, as in the body of Christ, to prove that she was not a witch. Okay? So they're like, all right. They stopped the little train, the trail, whatever they had going to take them to their place. And they got some bread, had a priest bless it, evidently. And she took the bread and she took one bite and she choked and died. Yes. Talk about trying to prove a point and it backfiring in your face, like 100%. The fact that she's trying to prove she's not a witch by ingesting bread to take in the sacrament, and she chokes and dies on the way to prison. I mean, I can't even tell you. She's trying to prove she's not this person, and she ends up kind of proving that she is this person, this witch person, even though she just choked and died on a piece of bread. That blew my mind. I was like, I gotta triple check this and make sure this is true. And I did. That's supposedly what happened. So you're probably wondering, well, what happened when they actually got to Lincoln, you know? Well, when they got there, Margaret blamed her mother, obviously. Let's go ahead and just blame the deceased, the ones that are not here anymore, because that makes so much sense. Blames her mother. Philippa blames her sister, herself, and her mother. Okay, and then they said that her mom had a familiar. It was a cat named Ruffkin. Yeah, Ruffkin. I can say that, Ruffkin. Yeah, that was Joan's familiar. Okay, so supposedly what they did to these boys, and this is what the girls are saying. The Flower sisters are saying that this is what they did. They're saying that their mom, Joan, stole a glove from one of the sons, took it home, boiled it in hot water, struck it along the familiar's back, and then pricked it with a pin. And that's supposedly how the kid got sick. Yeah, let that sit there for a second. And of course, while they did this, they were saying all these crazy incantations and things like that. That's what they were telling, telling these guys. And it's, oh God, it's so unfortunate that we don't know why these women decided to say that all these things happened when, you can't just take somebody's glove, boil it in hot water and rub it on your pet's back and then prick the glove with the needle and be like, oh yeah, now they're gonna pass, it's just not, it's so Harry Potter, and for people to think that that's how witchcraft actually works is bizarre to me. It's so bizarre. But anyway, that's just me on my little high horse, so I'm gonna go ahead and get off that real quick. And so we have these women and they're saying all these things, okay? And they keep going on because of course they can't do this by themselves. They have to pinpoint other women, and they do. They point out 3 other women, okay? But first, before they did that, they had communication with familiar spirits. These familiars would help them with their plans. Like I said, Rutterkin was Joan's familiar. They had stolen the glove, boiled it, pricked it, all that fun stuff had happened, and this caused the Lord to die, supposedly, after saying a bunch of incantations and all that fun stuff. They also tried to harm Lady Catherine, of course, but for some reason, she was not, like Ruffkin had no effect on her. On Catherine, although she did get sick, like I said earlier, she did get sick, but she didn't die. So evidently, even though the 2 boys got the girl didn't. Okay. So they also said that they had taken some feathers from the Rutland's bed and a pair of gloves. They boiled in water and mixed it with blood and cast spells to prevent the Earl and the Countess from having any more kids. They're saying that these women, the Flowers girls, now the daughters, are saying this, that's what happened, okay? Both sisters said they had familiars that visited them and would suck at their bodies, okay? Just keep in mind that these women are probably being tortured or maybe even threatened to be tortured. And that's why they're saying all these things. Or they're just trying to find a way out. Because they do, like I say, they go on to accuse 3 more people: Anne Baker, Joan Wilmot, and Ellen Green. And they were all taken to be examined by all these dudes, again, naked, asking questions, looking all over their body, looking in all the holes and everywhere. I'm telling you, it was an embarrassing situation. But they had them examined, and they were said to have visions, and that they also had familiars, okay? Now, if you don't know what the familiar thing is, a familiar is basically, supposedly, like an animal that will come to you and you ask it to do something, and you feed it some of its blood to the familiar, and it will do basically whatever you want. Now, in real actual life, we all know that's not true. I mean, I have an animal, I have a pet, oil pan. Y'all have seen popcorn, I'm sure. Y'all have heard popcorn, I know. And although they are my close animals and things like that, and I would consider them my familiars because I'm a witch, I don't use them in that way. I've never thought about using them in that way. I've only used my familiar's hair to make an oil before, because that's really good look. Anyway, so that's neither here nor there. So now, what did these girls say? You're wondering. The Wilmot said that her familiar was called Pretty, okay, and had been blown into her mouth by a fairy. Yeah, that was her familiar. It lived in her mouth, and it was blown in by a fairy, okay? And then later on, the fairy would appear as a woman and ask Wilmot to give up her soul. Yeah, like what in the world? So she testified that she was a cunning woman in using the familiar to inquire about the health of the people that she's helped. She says, I'm just using my familiar to go out and make sure that nobody needs my help, that nobody needs me to help cure them, because she was a cunning woman as well. She was a witch as well, or what they would call a witch. And so she said that she only used her familiars to go and check up on her patients, basically, you know, saying, hey, you know, they're doing fine. You know, my familiar's not a bad familiar. He just goes and checks on my patients and makes sure that everybody's okay. Now, Green claimed that she went out into the woods with Wilmot, and Wilmot had conjured up a kitten and a mole, and it climbed up on her shoulders and started to suckle like from her ears, like started sucking on her ears and stuff like that. Okay, Green sent the familiars to kill a man and a woman that she had beef with, evidently, and she was successful, is what she says. She says she was very successful in that endeavor, and the man and the woman had passed away. We don't have a name or anything. So that means this is so easily proven. You can prove if this actually happened or not. See if these two people are still alive. But, you know, they would rather believe that they were witches than actually have proof. As we've seen in almost every single episode of this I have done. Now, Baker confessed to a few things too, but she said she had a familiar and that she had visions. I feel like she was kind of like, oh, I'm here in this situation and I'm hearing what these other women are saying, so I'm just going to say what they're saying too, is what it sounds like to me. I don't think she was like a healer or anything. I think her name just got thrown into the mix, okay? So the trial, of course, both the girls, Margaret and Philippa, were put on trial and they were found guilty of witchcraft under the Witchcraft Act of 1604. They were actually hung at Lincoln Castle on March 11th in 1619, okay? Now, the Earl and the Countess were so nuts over thinking that, yeah, you know, this happened to their kid, that, you know, that their child was murdered by a witch, supposedly. So they actually had it put on their headstones. Yeah. It says, in 1608, he married ye Lady Cecilia Hungerford, daughter to Knight Sir John Tufton, by whom he had 2 sons, both which died in their infancy by wicked practices and sorcery. They had that engraved like on their memorial stone. Killed by witches, basically. Like they were doubling down. So you're probably thinking, okay, they died. You know, that's the end of the story. And they made a weird memorial to the sons and all this other stuff. But no. Somebody comes up with another way that some of these things could have happened, okay? And let me tell you, this makes more sense to me than saying those 3 women were witches, okay? So they were hired, right, to be at this castle and to be servants at this castle to help out when King James was there, right? Well, there was a really good friend of King James, and his name was George Villiers, something like that. Okay, so the word is that this guy could have possibly poisoned the brothers because he wanted to marry Catherine, the daughter, and with the sons out of the way, he would inherit the kingdom, the castle, the earldom, the whatever. Okay, now he planned to marry Catherine and get rid of the sons so that he could inherit the earldom. Basically, they're saying now that this man had the boys poisoned, and evidently Catherine probably got a little bit of it too, but once he realized maybe, oh crap, she's sick and she got into it too, you know, he might have stopped it. But it makes sense because the kids were convulsing and throwing up. Okay, they both died of the same thing. Nobody ever looked for poison, of course, in the autopsies or anything. And we know that they looked at their bodies after they were dead because they were royalty. Royalty always got the look over by doctors and wanted to know how they died, you know. But in this case, they didn't actually know how he died. But seeing this man come up and want to marry Catherine, it makes more sense to me that he had the sons poisoned to get them out of his way so that he could have the power of the earldom. That makes more sense to me than 3 women using animals to go out and do things to people. Does it not? You see what I'm saying? Like it's a huge twist in it where you're thinking this whole time, maybe even the mom and dad, they blame the witches in the end, you know, and the memorial. And they do that. But it's like there was a man there that wanted this power to himself, and that makes more sense to me than the 3 women casting spells, doing all these things, calling in other people and saying that they helped too. You know, I mean, it makes more sense that way, in my personal opinion. Now, this is you know, not proven, but it makes a hell of a lot more sense to me than the witch story. And there's another thing that will make this make sense, okay? Because after the sisters were killed or hung, whatever you want to say, for witchcraft, guess who this man ends up marrying? Catherine. Yeah. That solidified it for me. When I read that, I was like, okay, that man had them sons done in. Either that or it was the father's brother. Because after the father died, the Earl died, it went to his brother. Because it couldn't go to the daughter because she's a female, whatever. And so it would go to his brother. This guy snuck in and is like, I know he poisoned them kids, straight up. I know he did. I know he poisoned them kids. You can't be lying to me about that. I know he poisoned them kids. That's all I gotta say, because that makes more sense that he was wanting that money and that power. And then when he comes to find out that after the execution, he actually marries her on May 16th of 1620. Like barely a year later, and he marries her. What does he get? The kingdom. So he created a smokescreen, basically, of these 3 women, putting all the blame on them when he is possibly the one that actually killed these 2 boys. Bizarre, I'm telling you. I feel so bad for these Flower sisters and their mother. First off, I feel bad for the mom, because she was trying to prove that she wasn't a witch by eating the sacred bread, and she ends up choking on it, almost proving their point. And then the daughter is going and like saying it was their mom this whole time, you know, like even though she's passed away, we're just still gonna blame her, you know, like it makes sense. But for the times and for the books that were written during this time, everybody was fearful of healers, witches, shamans, midwives, anybody like that. They were on the chopping block because they knew how to do certain things like heal and bring babies into the world. But to have that knowledge, you have to have the knowledge of the bad, because when they bring the bad to you, you can cure it with the good. You see what I mean? And so these girls learning their herbs, evidently they never got married except for Joan, obviously. But her husband evidently passed away, leaving the 3 women by themselves. This gave the town an impression that because they were not with a man at all times, they were more susceptible to the devil. And so when they got called in to be a servant at this castle with this Earl and this Countess, yeah, they get into some bickering with the other staff. Maybe the other staff thinks, okay, I actually work here. You're just like hired in like Christmas help, pretty much. So you can go there and just say nothing. And I can kind of see how Joan, being this you know, very, you know, voiceful person, basically telling them to F off and all this other kind of stuff. And maybe the girls stole a few things from the castle, but they were poor. I'm not condoning stealing, No, I'm not, okay? I'm just saying that they had to do what they could to survive. Stealing is not good to do, by the way. It's bad karma, anyway. So these poor girls end up getting pointed at, the finger pointed at them, 5 years after the passing of these two boys, because of the witch panic that was happening all around them, okay? I'm going to pin the one that I was talking about earlier that I know I went over with the 9 women that were supposedly taking children to Blockula Island. Yeah, and all that stuff, and was like, you know, making them not remember things and making them fall asleep and taking them. It was a huge thing. But this happened right after that happened. And so everybody was on high alert when it came to witches and healers, and especially women that lived alone, that were unkempt, that weren't so sweet and fake to everybody that they met, you know. Maybe she was old, maybe she was lame, you know, and there's all these lists, these little check marks off the little book of saying they did this, they're like this, they're living like this, they act like this, that makes them a witch. Point blank, period. So, but then, what do we find out later? We find out that the guy that marries Catherine was probably the guy that killed her brothers. So that when he married her, he would be the Earl and the brothers would not be. That makes more sense to me than having women and their familiars sucking on them and all this other stuff, and them sending them out and them boiling the glove and then prickling it and all that. I'm sorry, but it makes more sense to me that the Villiers guy poisoned the sons so that when he married Catherine, he would get the earldom. That makes more sense to me. So this story was absolutely insane with the whole bread incident, and then now we have a whole new theory of how these two boys might have died. And I'm almost positive that's probably how they died. Like, that makes more sense to me than anything else. So, anyway, that's our story for today, you guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm sorry it's been so long, but for the next couple of months it will be this way. But once the kids go back in school, I'll be able to do this whenever I want to. So, I love you guys, and thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.